Check Podcasts.
Hey everyone, welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. Thank you so much for being here. I'm your host, Rob Shaw, and we're going to talk about a lot of things in BC politics today. The backtrack on the museum, the Premier's future. Is he getting closer to retirement? Take a look at some housing affordability issues as well. And as we do each and every week, we're bringing in the pod squad. You know them. Jillian Oliver, BC Green strategist extraordinaire. Katy Merrifield, Vice President of Wellington Advocacy, and Jeff Ferrier, Vice President of Hill and Knowlton. Thank you for being here, helping us break down BC politics each and every week. And I think it's interesting. I think this week is a particularly interesting one because we're going to start with the $1 billion backtrack on the museum. We've talked about it for weeks now. You can go back, listen to our past episodes on Check Plus, and we kind of thought this might be coming. The Premier announcing he's going to proceed with the archives building, $250 million-ish, but the main museum, the $800 million 8-year rebuild that was so contentious, is paused for more public consultation. Jillian, a surprise, not a surprise, the right announcement, the right way the Premier did it? What stood out at you about this week?
Well, I was surprised to see them characterize it as a stop and a complete, going back to the drawing board. I thought that maybe we would see, we're going back to a consultation, which I think will happen, but we haven't seen any timeframes. They're basically putting it on the back burner. So that came as a little bit of a surprise. I think that the government saw the polling that we talked about last week, and realized that this could become something that could cost them an election. So I think that the Premier's press conference and his decision have probably stopped this from becoming, a single election issue. But I think that it's still, they've still sustained a big hit to their credibility. I think, the government had earned a lot of trust throughout their handling of the pandemic and also through more thoughtful and careful governance when they were in a minority. But I think that this sort of gave the public a jolt that they're maybe not as in tune to them as they previously had been. And we see that reflected in approval for how the government is handling healthcare, affordability, and environment, which are the top 3 issues that voters are citing right now. So lots more to do, but I think they've sort of stopped the bleeding for now.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think it does stop the bleeding, but it leaves that lingering sort of question of how did this get through, ministry, tourism minister, cabinet, caucus, treasury board, the Premier, his advisors, without anyone kind of realizing wrong project, wrong time. That judgment question of whether the priorities are out of alignment with the public will be something, Katy, I think the Liberals will continue to hammer on. But what did you make of this announcement and the way it was done and kind of the way the Premier took responsibility as well?
I would say overall, look like realizing after 6 weeks what British Columbians knew 30 seconds after the museum was announced is not heroic and brilliant leadership, despite what the NDP Twitterati are trying to make it. I think that Horgan's apology and insistence that the blame rests with him and him alone is simply a calculated political maneuver from someone who isn't running again. That's all. What did stick out to me, though, Rob, and you just highlighted it, and Vaughn wrote about this week as well, is when he said that not one advisor, MLA, or bureaucrat advised him to stop the museum project before it was announced and landed terribly. And that is not possibly true. That's not. This was an active debate in government, and at least 2 ministers were opposed to this project. As a senior bureaucrat or a political advisor, failing to highlight the intense opposition and pursue other potential avenues on the project would reduce your advisory worth to that of an assistant to a legislative assistant, which I can assure folks is actually a real job in the legislatures. So I think he said all of this to keep the blame on himself. It inadvertently, to a certain extent, did make some of his advisors look like trained SEALs, which I think is unfair to them. But this was calculated. He knew he could take the hit. He knows he's not staying around for a long time, and so that's why it was framed the way that it was.
Just before we move on to Jeff, Katy, you've been in premiers' offices when things have gone wrong. Is it a 6-week pivot is pretty fast in the big scheme of things, isn't it? I mean, like when we step back years from now and look back on this, is that not fast for a government to backpedal on a project of this size, do you think?
Not really. Like, I guess I go back to when, if we want to use an NDP example, when Premier Horgan said that he didn't see color in the election debate. Before the debate had ended, he already had a statement prepared and was retracting. So 6 weeks is a long time in politics. Like, we live in an environment where you've got a few days to make a correction. So no, I don't think that was quick at all.
Okay, Jeff, what did you make of all this?
Oh, there's so much cynicism on the show. It's the summer now.
Wait, hang on a second.
The weather's nice.
Jeff, I just want to blink twice if you're a hostage in this frame. I just want to make totally sure.
Hey. Let's okay. So let's just say pivoting was the right move, right? The controversy had legs. There were more stories and chatter about the museum project than I wrote stories about Shania Twain when I was a reporter with the Timmins Daily Press, and I can assure you there was a lot of those stories. And the project was unpopular. Latest polls said the plan scored lower than my room rater ratings, as you alluded to earlier on. And I am safe. I am okay. I did make it out of the room. Hold up
today's newspaper just so we can make sure there's proof of life going on there.
Today is Friday, June 24th. But look I think listening is leadership. And I think the Premier did what he did because it's the kind of person that he is. You're always better off when you listen and move on to get on the right side of a debate than to be strong and stick with the position that people oppose. He's the kind of person who takes responsibility and is willing to pivot and take a hit if it's in the service of doing the right thing. I think that there was no one who was involved in the decision-making who is a front runner for a potential premiership in the next few years. So I'm not sure about that analysis. But I think at the end of the day, it gives us an opportunity to tackle the actual issue, get out of the where we were going to be no matter what for a long time, which was, this endless criticism of it's a bad idea and cancel it. And now folks are going to actually have to step back and say, okay, well, history is important. This was clearly the wrong call. What is the right call? How do we get this right? And I think that's good. That's a good thing.
I predict the longest consultation in BC Poly history. They're going to skate this so hard past the election, it's not even going to be funny.
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing Kevin Falcon's ideas on how to make the museum better. You saw Rob did a great column this week on potentially, getting out of this Victoria First mindset and setting up satellite museum offices in communities across BC. Great idea. I'm looking forward to hearing, now that Kevin Falcon has the opportunity to provide his ideas, to hear those out.
And I guess when Kevin isn't so busy with housing affordability, the healthcare crisis, the overdose crisis, and everything else that the NDP is currently failing on, he'll get some great ideas about what to do with the museum going forward.
He's had lots in the last few weeks.
Jillian, I apologize.
This is what's wrong with BC politics, folks.
There you go. Hey! A brilliant callback there. Let's just move on to the issue of the Premier. And everyone's alluded to it here. I want to play an interview he did with CBC Victoria host Gregor Craigie just this week, just before we record the show, actually, where I think it adds a bit of context to the Premier taking kind of full responsibility for this. He stood alone. He had no staff there. He took the blame. He apologized. Then the question was about his future. Here's what he said to CBC.
Are you planning to continue as Premier throughout the rest of this elected term for the next 2-3 years?
Well, Gregor, I'm currently in Vernon with my caucus. We're engaging with people here in Vernon-Monashee. I have a cabinet retreat next week in Vancouver. We're plotting and planning and preparing for the next 2 years, and so I'll have more to say about that as we come out of those meetings.
So I was going to go to Jeff first on this, but I'm taking that away now. I'm going to go to Jillian first. Jillian, what do you make of that? Like the phrasing, what he said there?
Well, the phrasing, I thought it was funny you said plotting because it kind of conjures, especially now he's got the mustache, like he's like a super villain, so like plotting. Yeah, I thought it was interesting. It's the first time we've really heard Horgan foreshadow that he might not run again after a lot of speculation. And I think that after the week and the last couple of weeks, it's probably not surprising that he's sort of feeling like less like holding up appearances if he is getting closer to making that decision. I'm sure the conversations in Vernon and next week in caucus or cabinet are going to be very serious, and there's going to be lots of debate because there's a lot to consider. I think, the biggest thing, of course, is that a leadership debate exposes internal divisions in a way that you don't normally see when there is not a leadership race in happening, especially when it's the premiership that's up for grabs. So probably who the NDP members elect to be their next leader will become premier if it does happen in the next 2 years. And so those stakes are really high. The NDP has done a really great job. We know that there's lots of diverse views in caucus. They've got a huge caucus, of course there is. And they've done a really good job of sort of keeping those behind closed doors. And it's going to be interesting to see them spill out. And, I'm sure there's a lot of kind of risk management considerations being made as to how to sort of keep that under wraps and keep governing effectively while that is occurring.
Yeah, it's a great point. The weaker the premier becomes, the more those divisions become evident as people position themselves to differentiate themselves from other candidates. And just by its very nature, as you point out, that they'll start to become public. Jeff, what did you make of the phrasing of what the premier said there? To me, it seemed like a quantum leap in terms of going from what he's been saying recently, which is, I'm excited. I've come out of my cancer treatment and I'm excited about the future and I'm ready to get things done, to I'll have more to say after I've talked to my caucus and cabinet. It seemed different to me, but what did you think?
It was interesting. It was the first time I've actually heard the interview. I would say that the premier has, over the course of the last 7 years, by virtue of the job that he's done, the winning of elections, of bringing in policies that have helped British Columbians, that seen us through some of the most difficult times in our province, and having cancer, that if there's anyone I know who has earned the right to dictate their own future, whether it's staying on or moving on, it's Premier Horgan. And only he knows what he's going to do. And I guess we'll have to wait and see what that is. My sense is that he's, this has been a premier who's been focused on British Columbians. We're heading into a Council of Federation meeting where he's leading the charge on getting more money to address some of the issues that Katy referred to earlier on around primary care and hospitals, and he's quite motivated on that and working hard on that. But it is an interesting statement. The premier has opened a lot of eyes and opened a lot of ears, and the next couple of weeks will be interesting. I'm eager to hear what he has to say.
Yeah. Katy, what did you think?
Yeah, it's honing in on the language. Typically, whenever you hear I'll have more to say without directly answering the question as it pertains to political leadership, that is absolutely an indication of change coming. That is similar sentiment to what we hear when ministers or backbench MLAs or outsiders even are considering political leadership bids. So I thought that was instructive. However, like devil's advocate, so what if he used that language on purpose to divert the political chattering class away from the museum, away from the issues that we've outlined for a few weeks? So instead of talking about physician shortages and museum fallout, they're talking about Premier Horgan's next steps. They're talking about the NDP's next steps. They're talking about what a great premier he has been. So is that a purposeful channel changer?
That's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. So he takes, much like the museum, he takes it back on himself and tries to kind of hold the public there rather than focusing its own attention. So if he does that, though, Katy, staying with you, does this turn into sort of a nonstop kind of feedback loop of speculation that ultimately forces him to, announce it? Is he not going to take every interview from now on, trying to push him to be yes or no? Is it not going to dominate all of the discussion? Or is that, I guess, what you said, the point?
Well, I think you're time limited in how long you can push this answer off. However, we are in the middle of summer. He's going to be in cabinet retreat all next week. There's no reason to do interviews. He could go for a couple-week vacation, make sure that COF is finished, and then make this kind of announcement in conjunction with his 5-year anniversary, perhaps. Like, he knows what he's going to do, but it was useful from a tactical perspective to drop that little nugget now, because it is going to change the dialogue from a wholly negative story, museum fallout, to looking back at Horgan's past and looking forward to next steps, which is infinitely more positive than an entirely negative story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective. Jillian, when you add that into what you were saying about kind of the divisions that then start to naturally occur when a premier starts to put one foot out the door, how do you think that would change the narrative the next couple of months?
Well, I think Katie's right. I think that, the NDP, going into a convention, any party wants it to sort of be a sense of excitement. Where does the party go next? And I think, that can potentially give people sort of a shiny object to spark their political imagination instead of focusing on the negative, focusing on what could be. But I also, I think that he took responsibility for the museum. Now we're talking about him and his legacy, and this is a big part of it. I don't know. I think it only buys them so much time. I don't think that I think that a lot of the damage from the museum decision has been sustained. I don't think it's gonna distract substantially.
Yeah. Jeff, you want to close us out on this topic? Any last
Sure.
thoughts?
Well, the first thing I want to do is I want to announce my run for the leadership of the BC NDP. I have my slogan already done.
Do you have another sash?
The sashes are printed. If Val Litwin and Stan Sipos can do it, why not me? The only point that I'm not running for leader. I never will.
Okay.
You need to be likable and able, and I'm not sure I fit both of those.
You're able.
Table stakes. All right. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm able. There's my sub theme. I think there's I think we've been talking about, different camps and I've seen that in the NDP and other jurisdictions. And my sense here is that I think we're overstating things if we're talking about big divisions within the caucus beyond, some regular annoyance at Nick Simon's heckling in the legislature, and it's ill-timed and sometimes it's just bad. On the priorities, on the overall approach, on the positioning, on the framing, on the it's a very able and very united group of people, particularly in cabinet. And I'm not going to say that there's no disagreements on issues, but this is in the NDP universes that I've worked in, this is I think that the impact of this leadership, should it come to pass, would be far less divisive than we've seen in some other jurisdictions.
Okay. Well, I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about it. It'll be one of the dominant topics throughout the slow summer months. I want to just jump in on housing affordability, one other issue that was percolating in a bunch of different ways this week, and give everyone a minute to give their thoughts on this. But we have a CMHC report talking about the enormous amount of housing we need to build to meet demand in British Columbia. We had the housing minister, David Eby, speculate about a rent cap because of the inflationary growth on potential rent increases. We had a panel discussion where the minister talked about taking some powers away from municipalities again. And we also had the Broadway density issue go through a vote and approval of Vancouver City Council. A lot of different tentacles of the housing affordability and supply file. Jillian, what jumped out at you on all of those?
A lot. I mean, I think one of the biggest things for me is the CMHC report, and there's two really notable things. One is it comes right out and says that if housing is going to be affordable, we need to see basically a 30% decline in prices, which, is something that politicians are not comfortable talking about because of the financial impacts on people who already own homes. And just the sheer scale of housing that we need to build in order to make a dent in affordability supply is where sort of, politicians from, federal conservatives to our own provincial housing minister have landed as the answer. And this shows just how difficult that is going to be to implement. So it's going to be interesting to see if we see any sort of, calibrations from politicians in their messaging and their plans in response.
Yeah. Jeff, you were on, I think, the panel, or what jumped out at you?
I was watching from the crowd, and there's some awkward pictures of me that showed up, and I'm off to the gym in response. We've got a housing supply problem. Pierre Poilievre, David Eby agree. When you have that big of the universe agreeing that that's the problem, it's the problem. And I am tired of local governments with political vertebrae disintegration. People who are afraid of what will happen to them if they stand up for more housing supply for people. And it's because of NIMBYs. And NIMBYs are the selfish of the selfish. Here we are in a crisis. Need 570,000 more housing units by 2030 to maintain a semblance of affordability. And you've got politicians looking to gain power and homeowners looking to line their pockets by advancing the notion that people who already have much deserve even more and people with nothing should get even less. I think it's disgraceful, and I hope in this local elections that are coming up that people vote for people who are candidates who are going to build the housing that we need over right now. It's urgently needed. Vote out the NIMBYs.
Sounds like a great platform for a leadership candidate as well.
I'm also not corrupt. I'm not corrupt.
There you go. Katy, 30 seconds on this. Sorry to cut you short, but what jumps out at you?
Yeah, no. What jumps out at me is provincial polling on this matter. The Angus Reid poll from last week, I believe, shows that 87% of British Columbians disapprove of the NDP's performance on housing. Factoring in cost of living, healthcare, and housing affordability are the top three priorities for BC voters. So it doesn't surprise me that Eby is maximizing threats to municipalities. Both he knows he needs to get that done, to deliver on this file, while simultaneously diverting from their own failures.
It'll certainly lead to some interesting municipal election discussions as we get closer to that as well. Thank you for being here, panel. Thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Listen to us on your audio feeds, on Check Plus, on YouTube. We'll be back next week for all the latest on Political Capital. Thanks for watching.